morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to see so many of you here this morning at this critical and timely event. Over the past 5 years, we have played witness to an unfolding economic crisis, the consequences of which have been felt to one degree or another by us all globally. Here in Europe, vast bailouts and financial relief packages have become remarkably commonplace as blocks of nation-states teeter on the verge of an economic and social abyss. We have looked on as governments have made drastic cuts to their public services and people are forced to tighten their belts as any future financial stability remains unclear. In the face of this, there has been actually very little debate as to the causes of the crisis. And I'm so pleased that the World Forum for Ethics in Business is a pioneer organization that is doing precisely that. We have built ourselves a system that values greed. Greed for money, greed for status, greed for power, a system that all too often rewards success at any cost and ignores considerations as to how it was achieved or who suffered for it. We have allowed market traders to operate without consequences for their investments and individual borrowers to live beyond their means. We have ignored governments who go on borrowing past their ability to ever repay and deferred their mistakes to future generations. We have exploited our environment recklessly, depleting natural resources without thought for their possible replenishment. What we face is not an economic problem or even a political one. We face a crisis of ethics. The solutions appear to be as clear as the causes. A critical imperative to translate accountability and transparency from words into reality. Words are so easy. We can blah, blah our way throughout the whole day. But nothing will change unless we have actions. A universal need for common system of values that mainstreams corporate shared responsibility and demands lucidity in business practices, ruling out ambiguity and producing measurable results. It is all too easy to stand here today and tell you that we need to cultivate such concrete codes of behavior, codes that address themselves to the external monitoring and implementation of verification mechanisms in business practices, especially and particularly in the areas of extractive industries and procurement. Yet, the ugly truth is that these are not easy solutions. Can we honestly believe that despite the fallout from the current crisis, the economic sphere has changed, that we won't face in the future such a crisis again? No, we cannot. In the recent Transparency International Global Corruption Barometer, a poll taken from 91,000 ordinary citizens, 85% of Asians, 89% of Latin Americans, 76% of Africans, and an astonishing 97% of Europeans stated that they believed that corruption had either stayed the same or gotten worse over the past few years during the crisis. Clearly, we are not doing enough. In light of the current economic situation, it is only fitting that we ask ourselves this question: has capitalism failed? David Hume remarked so many years ago, this avidity alone of acquiring goods and possessions for ourselves and our nearest friends is insatiable, perpetual, universal, and directly destructive of society. However, the general consensus from the 19th and 20th century debate over capitalism versus socialism has been that capitalism produces wealth, while socialism serves only to ensure that the poor remain poor. While one can sympathize or even agree that socialism in theory is a good idea, it fails to be practical in the actuality. It was Margaret Thatcher who once remarked, "There can be no liberty unless there is economic liberty." In essence, our individual freedoms are grounded and only possible when we have the economic security to support them. Capitalism, although perhaps demonstrated in recent years to be flawed in its implementation, remains, as Sri Ravi Shankar just said, the only viable option in safeguarding our basic liberties. Milton Friedman perhaps summed it up best when he said, "The only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade." I've just returned from China 2 days ago. They have moved 400 million people out of poverty. China is possibly the most capitalist society I have ever seen. So-called communist. The highest rate of tax in China, paid by the richest person in China, is 12%. Think about that. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kind of societies that depart from that. Whatever the flaws inherent to capitalism, I believe it allows the freedom for people to pull themselves out of poverty. Unlike socialism, totalitarianism, fascism, or any other host of other political economic models, it is a philosophy which trusts individuals with the liberties required to make their own choices. However, it must, of course, be coupled with the pillars demanded by any democratic society. Free press. And there's a raging debate going on in the country which I represent, the European Parliament, about whether or not to shackle the press with legislation. A free press, the rule of law, an independent judiciary, and free representation. And so, we must consider today whether self-interest, upon which capitalism relies, is moral or amoral. Indeed, is morality a matter of individuals choosing to take responsibility for their actions, or is it instead based upon individuals accepting responsibility for others? At the heart of this debate lies the choice between egoism or altruism. Today, as we discuss a roadmap for our future recovery and a viable system of ethics, it must by necessity be defined by a fundamental question needs to be asked. Is self-interest immoral, and consequently, because our capitalist economy is based upon it, will we inevitably reward greed in an environment that is defined by conflict? Or can self-interest motivate individuals to seek out win-wins in which aspects of capitalism, such as property rights and competition, create social harmony and prosperity? We must consider whether capitalism needs to be reined in. Accountability and transparency are clearly essential, and yet we must be careful not to fall into the trap posed by over-regulation. Increased regulation to business practices will merely serve to overburden already struggling small businesses, the very building blocks of any economy. Instead, the focus should be on clarifying and enforcing existing regulations. More importantly, we need to effect a perception to change the way we view business collectively. It is a much harder prospect that we face. instead of direct economic interventions, the consequences of which are typically hard to gauge as they benefit some while hindering others. We need a change of attitude. That is why I'm delighted to open this World Forum on Ethics in Business, and I'm sincerely indebted to the Art of Living organization for its sterling work. Such a change demands the involvement of all stakeholders, from the political, public, and private sectors, if we are to make the concrete and resolute strides needed for a better future. Thank you.